Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. In the summer of 2003, a fascinating experience occurred that would forever change the life of young Angus Malone. Living on a remote farm in the San Joaquin Valley of Central California, 10-year-old Angus experienced an encounter that would continue to challenge his sense of reality. It was a warm July night, the air thick with the scent of hay and livestock. The Malone family farm, nestled in the heart of California's agricultural heartland, was usually quiet after dark. But on this particular evening, the peace was broken by an unusual commotion. Angus, a curious and adventurous boy, was awakened at precisely 2:18 a.m. by the sound of horses running frantically in the pasture. The noise was unusual enough to rouse the young boy from his sleep and compel him to investigate. Without waking his parents, Angus slipped out of bed and made his way to the massive old barn that had stood on the property for generations. As he approached the barn, Angus could hear the horses starting to settle down, but there was still an air of unease that hung over the farm. The boy pushed open the heavy wooden door of the barn, the hinges creaking softly in the night air. What he saw next would change everything he thought he knew about the world. There, in the dim light of the barn, Angus saw a figure so extraordinary that it defied explanation. A being of immense stature, standing at least 9 feet tall, was in the process of climbing into the hayloft. Its skin was as white as freshly fallen snow, seeming to glow faintly in the darkness of the barn. Startled by Angus's entrance, the entity turned and locked eyes with the young boy. Despite its otherworldly appearance, Angus felt no fear. Angus even remembers wondering, "Why am I not terrified? I should be terrified." Instead, he was filled with a sense of wonder and curiosity. The being slowly descended from the hayloft, its movements deliberate and graceful, despite its enormous size, similar to a great ape, although its stance was perfectly upright like a human. As it approached Angus, the creature knelt down, bringing itself closer to the boy's eye level. It extended a hand, much like one would when approaching a wary dog or cat. Angus, clouded by an awestruck composure that surprised even himself, took the offered hand. The being's skin was cool, soft and smooth to the touch, but with a texture unlike anything the boy had ever felt before. In that moment, Angus noticed a sadness and weariness in the creature's eyes. They were jet black, small and beady, slanting downward in a way that gave the being an almost melancholic expression. Despite its alien nature, Angus felt an indescribable connection to the strange visitor. Guided by his innate hospitality as a child, Angus led the being to what he and his siblings called their hangout space within the barn. It was a cosy area furnished with old couches, a few toys, and an antiquated radio that had seen better days. Upon seeing the radio, the creature's demeanour changed dramatically. It rushed towards the device with an almost childlike excitement, its long fingers manipulating the dials and buttons with intense concentration. The radio was an old Philips model from the 1960s, with large dials and an extendable antenna. The being seemed particularly interested in adjusting the frequency, moving rapidly through different bands, as if searching for a specific signal. Angus, fascinated by the being's fixation on the radio, peppered it with questions about its purpose. But the entity remained silent, never uttering a single word throughout their encounter. In the absence of verbal communication, Angus decided to name his unusual guest. Radio, he called it, a moniker inspired by the creature's obvious fascination with the device. After some time, Radio's interest in the radio waned and it settled onto one of the couches. The couch, designed for human proportions, was comically small for the giant being. Its head rested on one armrest, while its legs dangled over the other, bent at the knees. Eager to connect with his strange visitor, Angus retrieved his favourite horse book. He sat beside Radio, flipping through the pages and pointing out various horse breeds. The being observed with quiet interest, with wide-open eyes taking in every detail of the colourful illustrations. Eventually, Radio gently closed the book, signalling that it had had enough. As Angus rose to put the book away, the creature lay down on the couch, its massive frame dwarfing the furniture. Before returning to his bed, Angus, in a display of affection, draped a blanket over the resting being. The next morning, Angus awoke with a start at 6:30 a.m. The events of the night came rushing back to him in a flood of vivid memories. He noticed his feet were dirty, as if he had indeed been outside during the night. Upon closer inspection, he found a strange iridescent residue on his hand where he had touched Radio. It sparkled faintly in the morning light, but disappeared as he tried to wipe it off. Grabbing a handful of snacks, he raced back to the barn, his heart pounding with anticipation. Upon reaching the hangout space, Angus found everything as he remembered leaving it. The blanket lay crumpled on the couch, the horsebook sat on the table, and the radio was out of its usual place. But Radio was gone, leaving no trace of its extraordinary visit. In the days following the encounter, Angus found himself unusually quiet and introspective. He tried to tell his siblings about what had happened, but they either ignored him or dismissed it as a weird dream. Afraid of being ridiculed or not believed, he decided to keep the experience to himself. However, he began to spend more time in the barn, hoping for Radio's return, and developed a keen interest in astronomy and radios. In the years that followed, Angus struggled to make sense of his experience. As a child known for sleepwalking, he initially dismissed the encounter as an unusually vivid dream. However, the memory persisted, refusing to fade like ordinary dreams. It wasn't until years later, in 2012, that Angus's perception of that night would be challenged once again. While watching the science fiction film Prometheus with friends, Angus was shocked to see a tall white alien on screen that bore a striking resemblance to Radio. The similarity was so uncanny that it nearly caused him to jump out of his seat. This cinematic encounter reignited Angus's curiosity about his childhood experience. He began to question how he could have imagined a being so similar to the one in the film, especially considering his limited knowledge of alien phenomena as a child. The only extraterrestrial concept he had been familiar with at the time was the cliché of little green men. As Angus delved deeper into his research, he came across descriptions of a supposed alien species known as the Tall Whites. The similarities between these accounts and his own experience were striking, leading him to consider the possibility that his encounter might have been real. Today, Angus Malone, now in his 30s, continues to contemplate the events of that summer night in 2003. While he remains open to the possibility that it was an unusually vivid dream or a product of his sleepwalking habit, he can't shake the feeling that something truly extraordinary occurred in his old family barn. The vivid details of the encounter, the texture of Radio's skin, the sadness in its eyes, the way it towered over the couch, its playfulness with the radio, its attentiveness to the book, remain as clear in Angus's mind as they were on that July night 2 decades ago. Whether a dream, a hallucination, or a genuine extraterrestrial encounter, the experience has left a defining mark on Angus's life, reminding us that the universe is undoubtedly far stranger and more wondrous than we can imagine. What particularly stands out as potential evidence that the experience was indeed real was the strange iridescent residue on Angus's hand from the following day. Although Angus admits that he can't be sure that this didn't originate from some other activity, such as from working with farm equipment on the previous day, he's certain that he never encountered this residue before or after the incident. As Angus continues to seek answers, his story serves as a fascinating addition to the catalogue of alleged extraterrestrial encounters. It challenges our preconceptions about life and invites us to consider the possibility that we are not alone in the universe.